In this video, we're going to be talking about the top 10 video games Dad hated most.
Oh man!
Some of the worst gaming experiences were experiences I had with my dad playing games. And as much as I don't really want to talk about these games, maybe doing this video will sort of be therapeutic for me to talk about these terrible experiences.
What do you think this is? I know.
But first, a word about this video's sponsor, Star Trek Fleet Command. When I was a kid growing up in the 90s, the only Star Trek video game I ever owned was this Tiger Electronics game that my Uncle Wes got me.
Star Wars.
Starfleet.
Star Trek.
Star Trek.
Today, we have Star Trek Fleet Command, a 4X MMO game set in the ever-expanding Star Trek universe, and it's available on desktop or mobile devices with a Scopely account. Recruit legendary characters to crew iconic ships from over 50 years of Star Trek stories and send them on missions of exploration to expand your territory. Engage players throughout the world in battles testing your strategic ability. Negotiate alliances for greater gains and harvest the galaxy's resources as you upgrade your fleet of starships. You have the con, Commander. There's no better time to start playing, as new features are continually added to the game, such as the Mirror Universe. Unleash the power of the Mirror Universe with the arrival of two iconic figures, new Enterprise officers Epic Officer Mirror Picard and Rare Officer Mirror Borg data. Sign up now and also get Epic Romulan Captain Nero for free. I've really been enjoying this game, guys, so use my promo code BOOST and get Star Trek Fleet Command today. You'll unlock a beginner station upgrade content pack with 300 Latinum, 100k Parsteel, 10k Tritanium, and so on. Use the link in the description or scan the QR code from the screen to install the game and boldly go where millions have gone before. Check out Star Trek Fleet Command today. Thank you, Star Trek Fleet Command, for sponsoring today's video. Dad was a champion for the Sega CD. He bought the add-on right when it came out. Christmas 1992 was the big surprise from Santa Claus. It really enhanced the Sega Genesis experience. There was one aspect, though, that Dad really did not get behind. He was not a fan of FMV games. Sewer Shark was the absolute worst game that came out on the Sega CD, in Dad's opinion. I remember him constantly making fun of this game. We would see Sewer Shark in the store, on the store shelves, packed in with the Sega CD Model 2, and he was just flabbergasted by the very idea. The game just annoyed him even further. The game takes place in a sort of post-apocalyptic future. You take control of what's called a sewer jockey, and it's your goal to rid the underground sewer tunnels of all of these mutants and monsters. And it sounds good on paper, sounds like a really good sci-fi movie, but the game just does not play well. I mean, for an FMV game, it has its charm. It was a game that was the poster child for full motion video games, and because of that, because of what it stood for, and the fact that it just controlled horribly and was just a bad game, Dad hated Sewer Shark. He hated what it represented and what it stood for, and he hated the direction Sega was going with it by packing it in with their Sega CD Model 2. But hey, Sewer Shark did give us some really funny one-liners, I will say.
All right, climb aboard, dog eat.
It's a fun game to watch somebody else play and just laugh at, get around with a few friends, and just have a good time looking at something that's just so dated and so antiquated, so of its time. All right, now this one I mentioned before in my top 10 games Dad hated but I loved video. And I had to bring it back for this video because it just remains to be true. Dad did not like role-playing games, and specifically, there was an entire season where he had a grudge against Pokemon. Pokemon Blue in particular was a game that I'd gotten when I was in 7th grade, and I went through this entire season where I was all about Pokemon. And man, the game just completely absorbed my life back in those days. I was around 11 years old. And I think, this one in particular was just really annoying to him. He didn't like turn-based RPGs, didn't like cutesy Japanese anime stuff. It was just all something Dad did not get into, and that's why it's on this list, because really, truly, Pokemon was one of his most hated games of all time. I loved it. I remember wanting him to really get into it. He would watch me play it on my Super Game Boy. I remember him sitting in his recliner and just kind of shaking his head. Did not like Pokemon, but I would be up into the wee hours of the morning, up at night, playing it in my bedroom until the batteries died. World of Warcraft. Okay, before people go nuts here, this game came out a couple of years before Dad passed away. So this is one of the last games I remember him not liking. And I actually talked with my cousins ahead of making this video. I asked them, hey, do you guys remember any games that Dad hated? Because I was trying to put this list together and I was trying to remember everything. And they both mentioned, Manny and Mikey mentioned World of Warcraft. And it really did jog a lot of memories of that time period, 2005. He did not like the Warcraft games or World of Warcraft, the MMO RPG that, of course, everybody knows these days. I mean, it's one of the most popular video games of all time. But Dad was not one of those people. He was not one of those people that contributed to the billions of dollars that this game made. Not his hard-earned money, no. First of all, it's a role-playing game. So that's already stacking the deck, stacking the cards against it for Dad. Dad hated role-playing games in general. There were just so many things that were really not appealing to Dad about this game. And the fact that this was a game that you couldn't beat. I remember that being a point of discussion. For Dad, I think you needed a story and you needed goals and a beginning, a middle, and an end, kind of like a movie. The idea of this open-ended, never-ending, massive multiplayer online game, it really didn't appeal to Dad at all. He hated World of Warcraft and often would make fun of it. Virtual Highlight on the Sega Saturn. This game was developed by Vic Tokai, and it was not a good game. I remember Dad wanting to love this game, wanting to fully embrace it. The first memory that crosses my mind is how insane he thought it was that the game took up so much memory on the Sega Saturn's internal hardware. That's superficial. The game itself is terrible. It is a chop fest, and by that I mean choppy gameplay. I swear this thing slows down to a crawl when it gets busy on the screen. It's a sort of open world action RPG before such a thing was really popular, and you would think, wow, that's awesome, it's doing something ahead of its time. Well, yes, but if only it was executed well. It is not executed well. It's a really, really awful game. This one looked really great. The box art was great. It represented something that we felt like was going to be a great adventure, a great fantasy role-playing game adventure, but no. Dad hated it so much that he returned it. Tailspin on the Sega Genesis. What an awful game. Okay, so I loved Tailspin. I was prime age for that show when it came out, the Disney afternoon. We looked at the game in the magazines, the pictures, the game, visuals on the back of the box. Everything about it looked very good. I mean, the visuals were really detailed. And on the back of the box, I can specifically remember it saying it was a 1 or 2 player game simultaneous. Now, this was always a exciting thing to see on the back of a Sega Genesis box. When it was a cooperative two-player game, you felt like, oh man, I could play this with my buddy, we could play this together. And I know Dad and I specifically wanted to play this game together. And immediately, we knew this was not one for us. It was a game that was plagued by really terrible design choices, the worst control. It's just so wimpy. That's a good expression for this game. It's a wimpy kind of like whimper of a game. I remember Dad and I playing Baloo and Kit Cloud Kicker. You know, you choose the characters at the beginning, and we were playing the game two-player. It was so hard for the two. This is a game, especially with its bad design choices, trying to play this game two players simultaneously is a nightmare. And it's such a shame because the NES game was really good, developed by Capcom. I mean, that was a good example of a Tailspin game. Maybe that's what Tailspin in video game form always should have been. This clunky, unresponsive, incredibly hard and unforgiving platforming game? No. Give me the NES game any day. Well, here we are at Trevorfur in the Crescent Galaxy. I feel like this is a game that I could do an entire video on because of just how infamous it was in my family and between my dad and I. Atari meant a lot to Dad. Atari is what made him a gamer. And for Jaguar to come out in 1993, it was something that Dad had a lot of hope in. And we ended up waiting and getting the system when it was discounted. But he became a big Jaguar fan, and there's a lot to love about the Jaguar.
Whoa, the cat!
Lots of great games, but Trevorfur is not one of them, if you ask me. And if Dad were still here, he would say the same thing. Really, it brings you in with its really cool box art, and you kind of feel like this might be some sort of Star Fox style game with its anthropomorphic, animal characters flying through space, piloting spaceships. Man, the computer generated visuals and those backgrounds just looked magnificent as stills. When the game is moving, you realize this is a turd. What a terrible game. I remember firing this up for the first time after Dad and I got it, and we had some hope that it would be good, even though the reviews were bad. And oh my gosh, the game starts with this terrible music. I mean, it sounds like it could have been made on a Casio keyboard from the 80s. Boy, is he talented or what? It's such a bad title screen music opening. It just feels like shareware. And then the game actually starts, and there's no music whatsoever. This is the nail in the coffin. This is what killed the game for Dad and I. This game, it's terrible. It's so bad, and it was a game that we made fun of to no end. Oh, we used to say back in the day, at least it's not Trevorfur. Whenever we were talking about a different game, if a game was bad, we would say, well, at least it's not Trevorfur. That's how bad this game is. It's one of those, it's so bad, it's bad games, but I have a soft spot for old Trevorfur. I feel like we've been through a lot together. A lot of jokes, a lot of fun has come at the expense of this terrible game. And so, in a weird, ironic way, I like the game. But back when Dad was with us, oh, he hated it. Hated it. Night Creatures on the TurboGrafx 16. This is another game I feel like I can do an entire video on, because this is the game that originally made Dad and I think that the TurboGrafx 16 was a terrible console. The original HuCard version of the console, the original TurboGrafx 16, went on sale, and so we decided, hey, we're starting to pick up and collect other game consoles like the Sega Master System and the Atari 2600. Maybe TurboGrafx is next on our list. And we picked it up, and he told me, you can pick one other game. Well, I looked at all the game boxes for the games that were there that were discounted and on clearance, and the game that really stood out to me and looked great from the box art was Night Creatures. How many games duped us with bad box art? This is one of them. Well, we brought this game home and the system. We fired it up, and we were met with one of the worst gaming experiences of our lives. I'm the one who convinced him to buy the game when it was clearanced, because I knew from my friend Chris it was a good console. But Night Creatures was not the right game to introduce the console to Dad with. Bad control, oftentimes bad graphics, gameplay. Night Creatures is one of those games that you just want to stay far away from. It's an insult to an otherwise fantastic and legendary library in the TurboGrafx 16. We actually returned that TurboGrafx 16 and that game, and it wasn't until the Turbo Duo was heavily discounted that Dad decided to give the console another chance. For so long, it was one of the games that Dad hated most. Couldn't understand. It was such a bad game, it nearly killed his entire experience with the TurboGrafx 16. I'm glad other games came around to prove otherwise, that it was a good console. Conan on the NES is one of the worst video games ever made, and it was one of the games Dad hated most by far. This game, it had so much promise in its franchise. Conan the Barbarian, when I was a kid growing up, my dad would actually show me this movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was every kid's hero. And he would show me a censored version of the movie, skipping through the more adult portions of the film. He wanted me to experience the movie because it was such a fun and great movie and character. And I actually really loved the Conan character as a result when I was a kid. So when it came time to rent this game, I remember we rented it from our local mom and pop video rental store back in the early 90s. It is just so clunky, so poorly executed in its design. It feels like you're pulling teeth just trying to do and accomplish anything in this game. Dad and I never made it past the first stage of this game because it's so cryptic. It doesn't tell you what you have to do to pass the boss character at the end of the stage. And you're just running around in this horribly controlled game with the worst music playing on loop. You punch skeletons and you knock their heads off, and you just trying to land a hit feels like a chore. And we made fun of it for years. For years, this was in our minds. Dad and I would call this the worst NES game, if not the worst game we'd ever played. Don't put yourself through any torture by playing this game. Really, you would have to be some sort of masochist to play it. It's that bad. Don't even touch it. In fact, I'm sorry for even bringing it up. I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of PTSD with this one.
Awesome, awesome, kicks Dr. Machino's butt.
I'm awesome!
Awesome Pawsome Kicks Dr. Machino's Butt, the full title. It's such a bad game. This is one of the worst Sega Genesis games ever made, and it's one of the worst video games ever made, honestly. Dad hated this game, despite my desire to really want to like this game when I was a kid. It was a side-scrolling platformer that was sort of like a Sonic clone, and I loved Sonic the Hedgehog games. It just plays so horribly. It's a chop fest. Some of the most choppy gameplay I've ever seen on the Sega Genesis, which was a console that, had some of the fastest and smoothest games ever. I mean, this is trying to be sort of a Sonic the Hedgehog clone, and Sonic the Hedgehog makes this look like garbage. It's a really bad game. It plays awful. This game makes Bubsy look like Super Mario 64 or something. This is terrible. This is one of the worst games ever, and it's one that I often make fun of even to this day with my friends, my gaming buddies who are into the retro scene. They all know I hate Awesome Pawsome. Well, it wasn't just me. Dad hated this game too. And I have so many fun memories of the disgust he had for Awesome Pawsome. This game is so bad, I'd rather eat the Awesome Blossom at Chili's and get sick to my stomach and throw up. Like, That's how bad this game was. And now I'm realizing most of you probably don't even remember what the awesome blossom at Chili's was. And coming in at number 1 at the very top of this list, Dad's most hated game of all time, Fantasia on the Sega Genesis. If the game has Infogrames written on the box, developed by Infogrames, run for the hills. They're one of the worst developers of all time, responsible for some of the worst games ever made, including this turd, Fantasia. There was so much hope and potential for this game coming after Castle of Illusion, and for this game and its terrible music, its clunky controls, just how the game plays, you don't know what you're doing. You don't even know what your goals are. I can remember looping constantly the first stage and never being able to actually beat the first stage because I didn't know what I was doing or how to progress. And the stage keeps looping until you get the right item or collect the right thing. Honestly, to this day, I don't even know what you're supposed to do. And I can remember Dad just being so frustrated. And it's so funny because you can even see it in this clip from us showing off our Sega Genesis games on tape, on camera. You know, Dad filmed us on the couch.
It's Mickey Mouse, Castle of Illusion. It's even better than the cartoon playing at your local theater. And the sequel to it, which is not as good, Fantasia. Yes, Fantasia.
This game became one of the games we made fun of the most, and it was a game that it set the bar for what not to do in a video game. Because of that, because of how angry I know this game made him, and I remember his reactions like it was yesterday. I know for a fact that this was the game he hated most. And I think it was also because of the property that it represented. Dad was a huge fan of Disney, and especially the classic golden age of Mickey Mouse cartoons and early Disney animated films. And this was something that he appreciated big time. And oh my gosh, the failure of this game was only magnified because of it. And Dad hated it to no end. Well, that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this rather bleak look at the worst games that Dad ever played, the ones he hated most. It was really fun for me to look back at this and remember these games, but it also kind of was like, oh, remembering some sore, bittersweet memories. Obviously, great memories with Dad playing video games, but also just the horrible experience of some of these games and just the grueling, masochistic nature of playing them. But honestly, so many of them now are good memories for me because they're memories I got with my dad. And they're memories, even though they're memories of bad experiences playing video games, they were still experiences, and they were shared experiences. And that's the thing about bad video games or bad media in general. Good or bad, if you're sharing them with a loved one and you're experiencing it together, you're making a memory. Whether or not it's a good memory or a bad memory, it's still a memory. And if it's of somebody you cared about and loved, then it doesn't matter. That's the way these games are for me. I would love to know if you have some similar stories or similar experiences with terrible video games. Maybe games that you don't want to remember, but talk amongst us. I think you should bring it out. It's good to talk through some of the pain. I appreciate each and every one of you for watching this video, and hey, I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.